Hi everyone, welcome to our FEDSA meetup online stream, whatever we want to call it. Thanks for joining us tonight. We're going to do an Ask Me Anything on CSS. We've received some questions which we'll go through. But before we get to that, let's just quickly thank our sponsors, as always, at the moment, NML, software development company in Cape Town, that have been sponsoring us for, well, since the inception of CT Feds, all the way back. And IO Digital, who've also been a great supporter of us also from the beginning and continuing to do so. Just something to quickly announce is that we have another event on Monday the 30th, and that is we recently hosted a session on using Framer and Figma, and for this one we're going to be looking at exploring forms in Framer and a practical guide for designers. So there's a skew towards that, but there'll be lots of things in that that are helpful to front-end developers who are interested in learning and using Framer as well. Okay, so we asked for some questions to be posted in our new Discord, and we got quite a few nice responses there. So thanks to everyone for that. We'll add them to the screen, and then we'll go through them as we go. If you have any other questions, please just add them in the stream comments. They do come through to us here, and we see them, and we'll add them onto the screen as we go. And of course, we have a Takealot voucher to give away to whoever we think has asked the best question. All right. Okay, so if you don't know us, I'm Justin, and joining me tonight, Schalk. We founded FEDSA. We've been around for a long time. I'm sure you all know who we are and what we do, so we won't go into that in much detail. But I thought shall we start with centering a div, Schalk?
Well, so I think before that even, do we want to even talk about like the new branding and stuff, or?
Sure, we can do that. Yeah.
I'm way too lazy, so it's actually just asking you whether you want to talk about it. I don't have the mental. I just had such a dumpster fire of a day. I was hoping to prep some stuff for today, but didn't even happen.
Yeah.
So
okay. Yes.
Do you want to talk about the new branding?
I'll speak about that a little bit. Yeah. Okay. So, we were originally FEDSA, Front-End Development South Africa, and then collaborating with the other group that Liesel Bester started called ZAPD or ZAPT, South African Product Designers. And we've been working together for a long time now, a few years, on both of those projects. And we've decided that we are consolidating everything under one banner, which is still going to be called FEDSA, but it's now going to stand for Front-End Engineering and Design South Africa. So we're consolidating the front end and the design parts. And previously we've done quite a lot of things via ZA Tech Slack, but we have now started our own Discord, and we urge you to please encourage people to join that. Because we're going to be running everything through there from the foreseeable future. The Slack instances will be up. The ZAP D1 will be up for another week or two, but then it's going to we're going to shut it down. Feed SA because we are hungry. Thanks, Andre. We'll see. That may be beyond our mission statement, but
so let's just let me just real talk. So one of the reasons why we just stuck with the acronym is because FEDSA is a registered nonprofit, and if we want to change the name, guys, that is dealing with anything with the government. When it comes to changing the name of an organization or something, if we can, we'd rather avoid that. So we kind of really stretched our brains to figure out how can we merge the two organizations without having to change the name of the entity. So
yes.
So if anyone wants to volunteer to do all the SIPC and nonprofit re-registration stuff on our behalf, I'm happy to chat, but I'm not going to go through that again. So okay.
So as I say, we'll be running via the Discord. We've also got a new website in the works. We've got new branding that's being worked on. You can already see a glimpse of it in the background here on StreamYard. You may have noticed that our LinkedIn is updated with new designs, and we'll launch the new website in due course.
Yeah. All right. So
Okay.
yeah, let's dive into it. We have a ton of stuff to cover. So
yes,
yeah,
we have
let's
a
go.
lot of questions and not a lot of time. So should we start with this one?
Yes.
Okay. So the question was from Zando, I think. How do I center a div? It's been a kind of age-old. If you've been working in CSS for a long time, this is something that you are familiar with. And there have been many, many methods that have been employed over a long time to center something. And yeah, we're talking about horizontally and vertically. Yeah. Horizontally is easy. Margin zero auto, if you've got a fixed width, text align center on a parent, whatever it might be. Simple. Yeah. Once you need to do it horizontally and vertically, it's been very tricky in the past, but nowadays it's actually very, very straightforward.
I used to whenever I did a talk on like CSS or whatever, there used to be like a really great meme that I used to use, and I'm just like so bummed that I can't use it anymore. I'll see if I can actually find it now, which was kind of around the time. I don't know if you remember when Red Bull had that thing where the guy went up and like he like, I don't want to say free falled, but whatever from the balloon, and someone had a picture of that, and it's like man can jump from outer atmosphere, but we still can't center a div in CSS. Let's see if I can find it out. That was pretty great.
Okay,
but that's no longer the case. Yeah,
that is no longer the case. So I've just put together a little few snippets of code going from like how we had to do it. And to now how we can do it. So I'm just going to share that. We're probably going to get an infinite mirror thing here for a second, but I'll quickly get rid of that. Schalk, just let me know if everything still looks fine. Right, can we see this VS
you
Code?
were fast enough. We didn't even get the hyperspace.
Okay, good. All right. Yeah. So I just put
maybe
together
just
a few examples.
Zoom in a little bit if you can for just people's smaller screens. Yeah, that should be fine.
Let me just get rid of terminal and sidebar. How's that?
100%.
Okay. So this is the very old way that we used to do this. Let's say we had a div with a class of parent, and then we want to horizontally and vertically center an element inside that. What we would do is we would change our display property on our parent to table. A default for a div is, of course, block. We would change that to table, give it a width of 100%, a height of 100%, and then the element that we wanted to center, we would change its display property to table cell, which then allows us to use vertical align middle and text align center, and that would center an element. Now, of course, this is not what these display properties are meant for.
Maybe just scroll down a bit, just because our videos are just over that lower bit.
Okay. I'll just go to the CSS.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I think it's obviously important as well. Maybe you want to touch on that. Like, why do you override the display style? Why don't you just like use a table?
Right. That's a good point. Yeah. So
I'm gonna win that. I'm gonna win the Takealot voucher.
You're gonna win the voucher. Yeah. Not eligible. Yeah. So when we first started working with HTML, we didn't have CSS. So everything we didn't. Everything would be laid out in a table, so you could have control over it. And but that was obviously a very non-semantic way to do layouts. And I guess around the early 2000s, there was the whole web standards movement, led by Jeffrey Zeldman, amongst others, that started advocating for moving away from table layouts and starting to use semantic HTML elements. So that's really the reason why we wouldn't use a table. Also, tables, their purpose is for tabular data, not for any other kind of content. So we shouldn't really be using them to show anything else other than tabular data. It's not accessible. It's not semantically correct. And tables are also quite slow to paint, because of all the nodes that need to be rendered within a table.
Yeah.
So
I think it does a double pass.
It does, yeah. So
Yeah.
it does do a double pass. So
And I think
there's
another thing as well is that's worth mentioning, even if you don't care about all the semantic stuff and so forth, it's just like having a table be responsive is an absolute nightmare.
Yes.
Yeah, which is why I tend to actually, when I'm using native, like actual semantic tables, I tend to almost across the board override their display as to block or flex or something.
Yeah,
just
I've also
because
been,
yeah.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, just because like the actual table box model is just like, it is such a nightmare to move things around in any way that's not a table.
Yeah, very difficult. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, and of course it's not responsive. If you do this, you're changing that display property, you're getting into some nasty, unexpected effects when you are looking at any kind of responsiveness. Yeah. Right. Okay, so that was kind of the first way we did it in CSS. And then the next thing to do that came around was absolute positioning, which you might
I know a
remember
lot of
this
people that still do this.
Yes. And this came about when we got transform properties in CSS. And here, if we position something absolute, of course, having a relative on a parent, and then we said, make it top 50% and left 50%, and then transform and translate it -50 and -50. And
That's
that
interesting.
sends you
I've
both
never,
horizontally and vertically.
so whenever I used to do this back in the day, not gonna lie, I was still doing this type of thing up until like around 2016, maybe early 2017. So let me just put my phone on silent. I actually never thought of doing it that way. I used to do the calc. And then I
Right.
would
Yes.
minus the actual like size of the thing that I'm centering. But this is actually nice because it like you don't need to know the size of the thing that you're centering.
No, you
in the
don't.
front.
Yeah, it's size
That's nice.
independent. Yeah.
I never did it like this. I did a calc. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I mean, this only came about when we got support for transform properties in all browsers, and then we got support for everything in Flexbox, and that made things a lot easier. Where we might have a parent and then anything and something inside that, and on our parents we can just say display flex, justify content center, align items center, and essentially those 3 lines, and we're done. And then you can also do things like give it a height and use VH or a min height with VH, and that's now getting us into more responsive kind of territory for these kinds of elements.
I see.
Yeah,
Also,
so-
Sean also made a good comment. Like, I think he also asked a question, a really great question in the questions we took beforehand. Maybe do you just want to quickly throw it on there? I think which is also interesting is that before calc and transforms and all these things, we used to actually do it with negative margins.
Yes.
And yeah, and like I'm saying now, 2016, I still did it with like a calc, and I remember like actually, calc wasn't widely supported. So
No.
I had a like a negative margin fallback.
Yeah. I mean, even when Flex came out, we was and before Grid and before we had Gap in Flex, we were still using negative margins on containers to create grids and things like that.
Yeah, Gap changed my
Only
life.
a couple of years ago.
Yeah, like it just
Okay.
it removed so many utility classes that I had to use
Yes,
just like day in day out.
Yeah. And then so we had Flex. That's one way to do it. And then you can also do it with Grid, and Grid is actually a lot easier. I mean, a lot simpler. Display Grid on a parent, and then place items center. And that just makes everything vertically and horizontally centered within a grid. All right, so we no longer need to do these kind of hacky things, display table cell, or transforming and positioning, blah, 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 blah. If but that doesn't mean, like this works still perfectly fine. Yeah. You don't need to go and comb through an old code base and replace things. That they still work fine. Yeah. Just one thing I just wanted to mention that people might not be aware of is that for position absolute, we've always done top, right, bottom, left, etc. We now have a new property called inset. And this is part of logical properties, inline sizing, block sizing, etc. And if we say inset 0, it's literally the same as doing that. And then we can add a margin auto. If we know the width and the height of something, and it's never going to change, and it's going to be positioned absolutely. And sometimes we need to position things absolutely because we're putting them on top of something else, right? And we want to center that or position it, use inset and margin rather than top, left, right, etc., etc.
And I almost wanted us to segue into logical properties, but I think that's maybe a can that we can open up a bit later, because it's a kind of a one with a lot of worms in. Oh, there we go. So okay, maybe share my screen, and then oh no, you shared your screen. Okay. Wait, sorry.
No,
no man, I'm being
yours.
I'm like I said, guys, it was such a disaster of a day. Okay, so just in short, just to summarize what you said, if you have div and you have class, let's say example, and you have 1, 2, 3. Also, what's nice is it also you don't even need an actual HTML node in there. You can just have a text.
No, you don't.
As well.
That's right. Yeah.
So then you would just do. Let me just change this, just to, just the too long didn't listen version. You basically just do example, and there's two things. So first you need to set it to flex, and then you say justify the content center and align the items also center.
That's right.
Items center. Yeah.
Or you do display grid.
Yeah, that's
and
the other one.
Place items center.
Yeah. So style. Yeah. I still just do the flex one out of habit, but the grid one is probably, I guess, better. Display grid.
Just some caveats that you need to note when you use either of them. If you have an element that has a margin, grid does not collapse margins. Just something to remember. Yeah. I see Sean says that place items works for flex blocks too. I wasn't aware of that. So there we go.
Oh,
we can
really?
actually just do one line.
Okay. There we go. Cool.
So yeah, we actually don't.
Well, there I learned something. Cool. Thanks.
Me too.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Sean. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, and so we'll talk about those logical properties and things a bit later as well. But I think before that, I want to quickly chat about Elsevier's question, and so I think I should rein myself in here because there's so much stuff to talk about here, from the move to kind of React server components and things like MUI and CSS and JS and whatever. But so her basic question was that when you're using Next.js and you're using the app router, what is the best way to integrate Material UI? And unfortunately, I don't think I can give a satisfactory answer to that. I don't know whether Justin can, but it's like every answer to that has so many caveats. And I think let me try and explain why. So maybe I can sketch this out also to explain it more easily. So basically, so you have Material UI, the library. So for those of you that don't know, that Material UI is, or MUI, because it's not technically 100% material anymore, but it's basically kind of I'd say it's probably hands down the de facto UI library when you're using React. There's like Ant, and there's some upcoming ones like Next, CSS, and so forth. But generally, like I would say, MUI is kind of like the bootstrap of React. And just in terms of like the ubiquity. Would that be a reasonable thing to say, Justin?
I think to some extent for React, yes, definitely.
Yes.
When we're
Yeah.
talking
No.
about Next,
Yeah, no, I'm specifically talking about React. Yeah. So next, actually, yeah, next you would probably do Tailwind.
or Shadcn.
Yeah, and
So
they
Shadcn is Vercel is
yes,
paid for and sponsored by Vercel.
yes. Then there's also a Next CSS, which is what or is it Next, or is it CSS Next, or I think it's
CSS
CSS
Next. There it is, number
Yeah.
3.
Okay. Did I get rid of it now again? What's this popcorn stuff?
No, that's it.
Oh, celebrating popcorn. Okay, cool. Google. Well done.
Love Smashing Magazine.
Huh? This one?
Yeah, isn't it that one?
Is that the? No, this
No,
is not. Yeah, I was like, this logo has like an eagle in it. Man, what is it called? Is it CSS Next? Was it maybe? Oh, I think it's Next.js CSS. Flip, man, how can I not remember what the thing? But you know what I'm talking about, right?
Actually, I don't.
So it's an extension of Tailwind. Okay, am I going mad? If anyone in the text chat knows what I'm talking about, maybe I dreamt it. But it's basically what the next team is building on top of Tailwind, just for like a high level abstraction. Okay. But yeah, there you go. These are generally, and so then the question is why? Okay. Why have these picked up over something? So let's put them in a little box here. Shad, CN, and Tailwind, and so forth. And the reason is, so MUI is built on something. It used to be built on something called, I think, JSS, and then they changed it to Emotion.
Yeah.
And so basically, these are CSS and JS libraries, and I think we can maybe, if there's time, dive a bit into like what is the purpose of CSS and JS libraries, because I don't think like kind of this completely replaces the need for or the usefulness of CSS and JS, because but yeah, we can touch on that, like, but it's for a very specific type of styling. But the main point is that you do the styling on the client side. You calculate your styles in JavaScript. So the problem is that, just to give a short answer, I don't want to like really go into the details, but it's actually very hard to do this with server components at this time.
Yeah.
There are actually some like things. There are things in the works. So the one is Pigment, which is like MUI's own solution to this. So they're moving away from Emotion and building their own thing called Pigment. Pigment MUI. And so there's kind of a bit of a Pigment CSS. There is some documentation for it, if I'm not mistaken. So okay, maybe Justin, you can see if you can find a link to the documentation. But so, and there's some other ones as well. There's Panda,
Yeah.
and then there's
Don't.
Style X. Panda, I've heard really good things about Panda. I haven't used it myself.
Okay, I don't want to get into it. That's another discussion. But
Oh, really?
I did not enjoy it.
Really? Okay. I've
Yeah.
heard some good things about it. But it might be an issue of scale, and like the person who gave me like good feedback on it maybe didn't use it at the scale that you guys do at NML or whatever. And then there's Starlex, which is React's, or not React, Facebook's own one, but so you might assume like, hey, let's use the official one. But the way Facebook works and so forth is you're not actually guaranteed that this thing is really going to get enough development to become mature or whatever. If you look at things like Recoil and so forth, everyone jumped on Recoil when it was released, and Facebook just never really developed it much further. And now there are things like Jotai and so forth that kind of give you the same thing, but just way better. So just a caveat, like I'm not betting on Starlex. I actually don't think it seems that promising. But there is a specific Facebook solution that they're trying out to fix this. But so basically, cool. Right, I see. No, but you also shared the GitHub repo. There is documentation somewhere. I think
No,
it's the announcement.
I can't
Pigment
find anything
CSS
else.
announcement. Let me just see if I can find it. Okay. Well, this is also maybe one of those things where I may be dreaming. I maybe had a dream where I saw all this stuff. Okay, but so so we are kind of over here at this point in this story, where this stuff is on the horizon, but it's still very like it's still very experimental. I wouldn't recommend it. So most people are now using like Tailwind and Shared CN and so forth, and that's because they actually work pretty well with server components. But then I think there's also another discussion here, which is that I personally, this is my personal take, I'm of the opinion that I think server components are, I don't want to say overhyped, but I think we're overcompensating. Because if everything in your app needs to be a server component, then I actually don't think you should be using React. If everything needs to be a server component, I think you're much better off using something like Django or Rails or whatever. I think the whole point of React is that there's an assumption that like there is some complicated state that lives in the front end. Some people might disagree with me here, but yeah, that's my general take. So my general take is that I I I don't try and make everything server components. It is the default, but I think the cynical part of me would say it's a default because Vercel, that's the way Vercel makes money. So they're going to make it a default because they make money when your code runs on their cloud environment on a server. They don't make money when your components actually run in a client in someone's browser. So I do think we're overcorrecting a bit with. I do think server components are really useful. They're really useful for like an app shell type stuff or stuff that's like kind of the periphery. But like the stuff that's at the crux of what you're doing, and given that you're using React, I would assume a lot of that still is client components, and also just like PSA that a lot of people get confused. Client components don't mean that you don't get server side or server side rendering. It just
Yeah.
means that code runs in the browser as well. Server components don't even ship JavaScript down. Okay, so server components only run on the server and push the HTML down. Client components run on the server and the client. It hydrates afterwards. Okay, so like, yeah, I think like people are pushing a bit too hard to make everything server components. I think it's in like the early days of hooks where people just wanted to throw everything in a hook. Turns out like some logic doesn't really play well with hooks, but yeah, it's new. Everyone wants to do it. Everyone's pushing it. Okay, so long story short, I do actually think that I do have a project that's using MUI, and we are still using Emotion, and it's not the end of the world. And when we use server components, we treat that on a case by case basis. Chances are, Material UI, most of the components don't even work without JavaScript. So if you're thinking drop downs, text inputs, all that stuff, there's a lot of JavaScript behavior there. So even if you get the styles working, if you use a server component, it's not pushing any JavaScript down. So, there's a lot of stuff that's probably not going to even work, regardless, even if you get the styles to work. So, yeah, my answer to that would be, at the moment, I don't think we should be that bullish on server components just yet. Even just because they also they need a lot of time to still mature.
Yeah,
so
I completely agree.
yeah, so don't try and make everything a server component. Be more deliberate. Swap it around. Do everything as a client component, and then in the cases where you're like, this can actually just render on the server, and I don't actually even need any client-side JavaScript. Let's say you have a nav bar at the top, or you have some footer. Like in the one app that we build, we have the footer where in the footer it just shows the kind of like the release version, like you're looking at version 5.1 point what, and it was released on this date, and like actual information, like because it's an internal business tool and stuff like that. That can be compiled on the server. You don't need to then rehydrate it. No, there we go. So my answer is effectively don't if you're using Material UI, just stick with Emotion. Use it in client components. If you're having trouble getting Material UI to play nice in server components, ask yourself, should this really be a server component? And if it really needs to be a server component, then solve that like on a case by case basis. Maybe then don't use MUI there. Maybe just have your own version of the button or whatever, and you just style it to look exactly like MUI. And I think maybe later on we can get back to like Tailwind and Shad CN and so forth, when I actually remember also the name of that other thing. But yeah. Okay, cool.
I've just posted 2 links to Josh Kamo, who explains things like super well.
Yes.
One on
yeah. I also highly recommend it. That is how I grokked server components. That was the article that really
me too.
nailed it for me.
And then another one he wrote also on CSS and server components and how to approach them. But just Schalk, just to back what you're saying about just if you're using MUI, just carry on using it with Emotion as is. If you look at something like Shad CN, and you look at their next components, every single one of them is marked use client. Every single one. There's nothing server related in there.
Oh, geez, sorry. Kom eens op.
At all.
Someone sneaked into my office. Ja. Sê hallo vir die mense. Ja, hallo mense. Jy gaan slaapies. Bye-bye. Okay. Yeah. She just came to say night. Okay. Cool.
Okay, cool.
All right, so let's move on. So I actually, if you don't mind, I would actually like to jump to the last one, because I am scared that we're not going to have enough.
Sure.
Yeah, and it's such a great question. It's actually from Sean. And so basically, from your perspective, are teams deliberately dumbing down their CSS to cater for contributors from lay persons, full stack devs, or are stricter skill requirements placed on teams to use these modern CSS features? So that's a great question. So the question is, like, if you use like a lot of these like modern things, like custom properties, layers, we spoke about logical properties and so forth, is like is like someone, do you run the danger of someone on your team who isn't really that clued up with like everything that's going on in CSS, looking at that and not knowing what it does, and trying to get it to work? I know for myself, before I knew about insert or inset, there was an instance where that was used on something. I actually even think it was Material UI, and I tried to like update the top position and the bottom, and I just didn't understand why it wasn't working. And it was also that case of where, you know, like it's the cascade, so it was from further down somewhere and whatever, and you know, so like it's like, yeah, I think like that's my take on this question is, first and foremost, like in our experience, do we see that, do we like see that generally like people that write CSS are advised to maybe simplify the CSS so that anyone can contribute to it? Or do we generally see that it's like, no, go wild, and everyone else needs to just up their game and get better at CSS? And then I think then there's also the question of what do we personally think is the approach?
Yeah. You know, something that I saw a lot when we first started seeing styled components is one of the which I do not like in any way. I'll put all my cards on the table. I will never use them. Is that one of the arguments for it was like, oh, you're opening like the CSS up to a lot more people, right? Because now it's sitting there and anyone can go and change a background color or whatever. Which, okay, fine, that makes sense. Of course, someone can do that. But modern CSS is very complex, especially when we're talking about all these new features we have that we talk about all the time, Schalk layers and logical properties and so on. So that argument's been around for quite a while, I think. That you know, if you use CSS in JS or whatever, you don't have to know that much CSS. Or if you use Tailwind,
I would go even further back.
I
would say this argument goes as far, or this dilemma goes as far back as Bootstrap. I definitely remember a time where the question was, do we use Bootstrap? Let me put it this way. I was actually working on a project, a very big project, where I was reprimanded for writing custom CSS, and not actually like using Bootstrap. Because exactly that, you know, like, so some of the other developers wanted, so because then I became a bottleneck. If I was using Bootstrap, everyone could just like chuck in your what is it, like M3XL, I can't even remember all that stuff, you know. And there's your responsiveness. Yeah.
Tailwind's just the modern version of that, isn't it?
Well, yeah. Well, okay, this is maybe a good example. So I think like I would maybe take Sean's question even further, and I'd say, like, you know, like, is that even a consideration that you make in terms of, should I just like hand roll my media queries, my whatever, or should I use CSS and just work with that abstraction so that anyone can come in and just like, if they want to change where this thing like goes below or up or resizes, they can just do that without having to even know what media queries they are. Because I think that was the thing originally with Bootstrap back in the day, is like not a lot of people even knew how media queries worked. And, you know, so they couldn't make changes to the responsive. I think a lot of people didn't even realize. I've definitely met people who didn't realize like you could actually do the responsiveness yourself. And they thought like Bootstrap was doing some crazy like WebAssembly stuff under the hood. You know? Yeah. So yeah, sorry, you were saying, like, I interrupted you, but I just wanted to point out, I think this goes even further back than modern times.
Yeah, look, I think, okay, I'll speak from my perspective and my team and how we run things. Is we are not averse in any way to using tools that have a functional way of helping within structuring CSS and not necessarily making it easier to write, but making it easier to be for its compositional elements. Yeah. So Tailwind is, from my perspective, Tailwind's absolutely fine, but with very strict provisos on how you use it. Yeah. What I like about something like Tailwind is being able to manage your variables really easily, being able to switch a theme whenever you want to, and so on. What I hate about Tailwind is when I see someone putting in 50, okay, I'm exaggerating, 20, 20 classes just to make something hover and have a focus ring. Don't do that in Tailwind. Yeah, do that in plain old CSS. Yeah. So I think there's a trade-off there, and it's how you manage it. Yeah. In terms of my team, we are all in on the latest features. We use them all the time, but the nature of CSS is that you're going to encounter things that you don't know. It doesn't matter how much you think you know and how much you've learned and how much you keep up, you're going to encounter things that you don't know. I have a junior developer on my team who is an absolute CSS genius. And I
talk about
look
Kate.
at her. Yes. And I look
Shout
at her.
Out to Kate.
If Kate is watching, I hope I'm not embarrassing. But I'll sometimes look at a PR of that she submits, and there'll be things in there that I have to look up, because I don't know what they are. But then you know them, and it has a lot to do with your process. Yeah. Okay. So there's okay, we won't look at that.
Xander just mentioned in the Discord, like, some things we shouldn't look at if we want to see some rough. Oh, I'm sharing my screen, so it's actually popping up there. There you go.
Yes, exactly. That's how I saw it.
Yeah.
So from my perspective, I really, really do think it's really important for anyone who works on the front end and writes CSS to be keeping up with it. Yeah. But you have to create the space within a working environment for that to be possible. And if you don't, then that's a different problem. Yeah. That's a managerial type of issue rather than a skill issue or whatever it might be. But that's just my perspective on how I work and run a team. Yeah. There are different constraints that people work with. Yeah. I mean, I'm fortunate to have that kind of a work environment where we do that. Yeah. But on the other hand, I'm also not prescriptive with my team members either. There's no like, you must do this, you must do that. This is how, if you do this, if you put Tailwind in something because you want to have a theme switcher, whatever, I'm not going to go and tell you to rip it out because I personally don't like it. Yeah. There are many ways to skin a cat in CSS. And I think if you are maintaining accessibility, you're maintaining performance, and you have a team that's willing to adopt things and learn from things when they don't understand them, that becomes a crucial thing. If you don't have that, then perhaps you need to go all in on, well, we're just throwing Tailwind at everything. Yeah. Or we just loading up an opinionated UI library and we're not really going to change anything except the colors. Yeah. We also work very, very much with design systems that are built in Figma, that are maintained in Figma, that are always updated in Figma. We're very completely in on Storybook as well. So in terms of that, maintaining those components becomes part of writing CSS that everyone kind of becomes familiar with and does in the best possible way. So yeah, I hate to be prescriptive about how people should write CSS. Yeah. Because everyone has their own constraints.
Yeah, and I also think it's like, it's like, I don't think you're gonna find a satisfactory answer to this. Like, I appreciate the question; it's an amazing question, and it's actually something that I've been thinking about, because I do think we've seen this with JavaScript as well, maybe a couple of years ago, where at the advent of year six, where like it was a big decision. Like, do you write simplified JavaScript, that don't use like, uh, let me think, like promises. Here's a good example: promises. Like, because promises wasn't part of the mind share for so long, and the moment there's someone on your team, like, do you force them to learn promises? I like, maybe on a more personal note, like, like, this is something I'm pretty bullish on, is that when it comes to stuff like reduce, in JavaScript, like, I'm just like, you just have to learn reduce if you want to work with me on a team. It's hard, and it's hard to learn, and yeah, like, it trips people up all the time, and we can probably write the same code with for loops in a much easier way, but that's just where I draw the line. I'm just like, you have to be able to use reduce, because I just use it all over the place. And I don't know, like, it depends so much from a project by project basis. So the stuff that I work on, I guess it also depends on, like, how quote unquote simple your styling is. Like, what are you styling? Are you just styling buttons and, you know titles, and is it more like a document type thing? And because, like, the stuff that I work on, like, to me, I'm 100% like, like, I just, like, I'm the bottleneck when it comes to CSS, and, like, everyone should use my abstractions, and purely just because the stuff that's happening at the CSS level is pretty intense, because there's a lot of stuff, virtualization going on of the DOM and whatever, and it's because the type of things that I work on is more closer to actual software, like,
Yeah.
than an actual website per se. It's actually more akin to like Figma, and does a lot of like Canvas and like WebAssembly and stuff. So
Yeah.
no, Xander, I'm not gonna take the bait. He asked me a question about reduce. This is you have to join in for JavaScript. Ask me anything. But yeah, so I don't know. Like, it depends on the type of project you're working on. Like, because the type of styling stuff happening behind the scenes, and also, like, there's a lot of complexity in terms of, it's a white label product, so then you have, like, things need to be styled for specific clients, and so there's like this entire cascade of, yeah.
Yeah.
So, like, in that case, it's like, this by definition, like, what's that thing about, like, intrinsic complexity and external or added complexity? I don't know what the Xander will probably correct me now, but there's a word for it. Like, that's just intrinsic complexity. It's just like the thing you're building, styling wise, is just very complex. So, like, it's unfortunately, like, you can't do it in a simpler way. So I don't know. That's all I can add to that conversation. I just think it's an amazing question, and I do also think, just to add to that, I think CSS is also at an interesting point. I did bring up, this whole thing about, like, um, sorry, about JavaScript at kind of the advent of ES6, and it's just because it was pretty stagnant for so long, and people just got so used to the primitives that you're working with, and all of a sudden there were all these new primitives. And now, if you wanted to use them, like, everyone on the team needed to know how they work. Um, and so it was kind of the same thing. And I think CSS is in the same place at the moment. We're just getting so many new things from, like, logical and, like, things that are paradigm shifts. Things like custom properties and whatever is still kind of, but, like, logical properties is, like, just like, it's such a different way of thinking. And I think we're kind of at the same place. I think it's just a case of people just haven't been paying attention, and then they encounter all of this new stuff, and it's just like, whoa, this massive world. And I think as people start realizing, CSS is actually moving quite fast now, last year, 2 years, I think that perception will change. There's maybe a perception that CSS is more stable and more set in stone than it actually is. I think that's what's causing a lot of the pain around this. but I think that will change. Yeah. All right. Let's move on to the next one. Let's do an easy one. Oliver asks, how do you change the color of a placeholder text in a form input? All right, let's get this one out quickly. All right, so you have your div, not your div. Let's just say your label, and in your label you have just like a span in there, and let's just say I don't know, username. I don't know. And then you have your input, and let's just give it a class of example. And actually, there is a pretty nice pseudo element to do this. There's actually a lot of really nice pseudo elements that have been secretly added over the last couple of years that people don't even know about. This is not one of those. Yes,
sorry,
go ahead.
Schalk, can you scroll a bit?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah. So you can just go dot example dot. So it's a pseudo element. So a pseudo class is a single dot. Let's maybe get into that. Let's assume someone was wondering what is the difference between this and this. I think like single works for pseudo elements as well, but that's actually
it does. But it's a throwback to IE, old versions of IE.
And it's one of those cases where, like the same with like articles and when you're talking about HTML, like articles and sections and all that stuff, it's just because people were using it incorrectly. So, like across the board, the actual specification changed to just be like, let's just change the way it works because people don't know how to use it correctly. But theoretically, I think this works. But theoretically, a pseudo element is something that gets added automatically, whereas a pseudo class is a fake state. So that would be like hover and so forth. Yeah.
Corresponds to a user action like a hover or a click or mouse over, mouse out, etc.
Yes. But whereas this corresponds to something that was created automatically. And so you can actually just do placeholder. And just do like color red or whatever. Best placeholder color ever. Yeah.
Just remember to also add your placeholder attribute to your input.
Oh, that's true as well. But now it's going to be red. Yeah. Yeah. If you really hate the world, do this. Okay.
Oh.
Yeah. I've gotten a couple of them, and then you have those forms where it doesn't tell you what's wrong, but the save and the submit is disabled, so you can't press it. It doesn't tell you, and this is why, as a general rule of thumb, I always allow someone to submit, even if it's not going to work. I think I learned this back from Adam Silver of gov.uk. He actually said it and made a lot of sense to me. Is if you disable the submit, then you don't have if it's always enabled, at the very least you always have a means to tell someone why it's not working. But yeah, it's a personal preference. But yeah, don't do this because then they can't see what things are filled in and what things are not filled in. Cool. There you go. What are some nice other pseudo elements for inputs?
Yeah. Sorry, Schalk, before you go, before we move on from placeholder, just one thing to remember there is that the browser is automatically going to lighten whatever text you put in there. So if you say red, it's not going to be the red that you would normally expect. So you just need to be a little bit careful there around your accessibility, color contrast with your placeholder color changes, and just make sure they pass those accessibility tests.
Yeah, but I think you're assuming that people know the hexes by heart. So they're just going to go and then just leave it. And you're solve that.
I can tell you right now, that's not going to be visible at all.
Yeah, no, but sure. But I think people they're going to look in the browser and see how that looks. I think at the very least, no one's just going to write a color here. Yeah.
This is
But
where
yeah.
HSL is your friend. Yeah.
Yes. I
But
tend to do a RGBA.
that's another talk.
Yeah.
Color properties.
I like my RGBAs, but yeah. Okay.
I'm all in on HSL.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, but let's maybe move on, and maybe if there's time. Spoiler: there's not going to be time. Let's maybe
Right.
grab a couple from the let's maybe grab a couple from the actual YouTube chat.
Cool. I'll add some. This one is actually related to one we had around just responsive stuff, around making things responsive. Yeah. What's the best way to do that? I mean, this is a massive question. Not something we can answer, quickly, but they're different approaches. So yeah, this is a good time to talk about intrinsic design, I would say, Schalk. The concept that we're not designing for a rigid screen but we're designing for elements that have width and height that we should allow. We should let go of our concepts of fixed widths and heights and things like that, and rather let the content that we're displaying determine how our layouts work. Coined by Jen Simmons. Yeah.
A while ago, quite a couple of years ago.
Oh yeah,
it hasn't really caught on. But yeah, like so, it's as Justin said, it's kind of like a paradigm shift. So it's kind of seen as a continuation of the paradigm shift that was responsive design. So the whole idea behind intrinsic design, as coined by Jen, is that you actually express your CSS more declaratively instead of imperatively. So instead of saying, put a margin here, do this, make this thing, change this thing, you're saying what you want. And the CSS effectively kind of figures out, given everything else, how to give you what you want. So you and I think things like view transitions is a really good example of this move to an intrinsic approach, where you actually you don't even do, you just say what you want. You say that, or you actually just say this thing is the same thing as this thing, and figure out how to animate it between pages, period. You don't you don't get down in the weeds determining how fast it should animate or whatever. And I think grid is also a nice one that I think is very much within kind of this move to a more intrinsic approach.
The classic. Thanks, Sandor. I'm going to add that in the chat. This article is a must read, and it's 24 years old.
Yeah. There's also a great one by the grain of the web.
Jason, the guy who's not Jason Santamaria, but the other guy whose name I always forget. But yeah, I know who you mean.
I almost wanted to say Frank Sinatra.
Frank Chimero. Frank Chimero.
Yes, Frank Chimero. Yes, grain of the web. That's great.
I'll find that as well. Yeah. I think grid is a massive tool in working this way because of things like auto columns with min max and fractional units and things like that, where you can create grids that don't need a single media query. And then of course we do have our good old media queries, but more importantly now we have container queries. And if you want to really get into understanding how you can create responsive designs that are going to work really anywhere, container queries is what you want to look into. I would say understanding flex and flex wrap, understanding when to use flex and when to use grid, because they do have different use cases. They don't replace each other. But that's important. We don't, now that we have grid, get rid of flex. I mean, my rule of thumb is if I have a row, it's one row, and its elements are of different widths, as in they're not uniform. My children are not uniform, use flex. If I have multiple rows and I have children that are going to be more or less the same size, then I'm going to use grid. But that's obviously just a rule of thumb. But
So
container
just
queries, very much
yeah,
something to look into.
let me quickly explain to those that don't know what container queries are, what they are. So basically, you might know about media queries. So media queries, the history around media queries is fascinating. If you want to dig into that, but so basically, media queries look at the size of the viewport. So let's say you have a little button here and you want to change the color of the button. Let's say when the screen is this size or when the screen is that size. um like let's say purple or red. So you change CSS based on the size of the screen. Okay. And so that's usually how we do responsive design. So basically, like as it gets smaller, or technically you should do mobile first. So you start with your mobile as the default state, and then you progressively enhance as it gets bigger. And so basically, but that is bound to the size of the screen. Okay. But there's a problem here, and that is that, you know, in this case, it's maybe not that bad, but there are cases where you don't want to base it on the size of the screen. You want to base it on the size of things around it. Okay. So help me think of a good example, Justin. So I think
Okay,
it's just.
so
Mm,
example I always use is like if you just draw a rectangle like a
mm,
card,
mm, yeah.
but like that's wider than it is high.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and then on the left you've got
Mm.
an image, say,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
and then on the right, like, but it fills the whole thing. Yeah, just
Oh, you mean like this? Yeah.
yeah, and then on the right you've got a bunch of text. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then what you want this element to do when the screen size changes is you want to drop the text below the image.
Ah, yes, yes. Okay, cool. Um, that is a great one, because I know where you're going with this. Um, okay, so so like so yeah, this actually. Um, so yeah, so this is a good use case. So actually, so here's one of the good reasons why I wanted um, container queries for so long is that, let's say you have your media queries and let's say you have some type of grid thing. Okay, so you have your things in a grid over here. Okay, so you have your things in a grid over here, and then like over here, like you stack them on top of one another, and let's say this is a bit of a smaller one, and then over here. So this is quite a common thing. Even with grid, you dynamically kind of sometimes change the amount of columns based on the screen, right? Okay, so this is all amazing until you add a sidebar. So let's say you're using this, but then on another page you have the same thing, but there's a sidebar on that page. So that means that you built this with assumptions around like that it takes up the entire width of the screen, but now it's going to get squished because okay, I can't, but like yeah, like this is the one I
Yeah,
most commonly get is
and
that
especially
yeah.
sorry, especially when that's a fixed element in like, and you've got a dashboard or something.
Yes. So you don't want to base how big this should be on the size of the screen. You want to base it on like the size that it has available. So in here it has that available, and then over here it has that available. So that means if let's say like you actually have like let's say you have something that takes up all of this space, um and you only have that space available, then you actually want it to render like that. But once again, at the moment you bound it to like with media queries, you bind it to the screen size. So the container query, you bound it actually to the space available on the parent. Yeah. That being said, I've actually found that with kind of this move to intrinsic design and so forth, that container queries are less useful than they were when I think we started like clamoring for them, which is interesting, I think. But anyway, I think that's part of another discussion. We solved it in other ways already.
Yeah, we did. But but there's one thing that I think people often miss with container queries is that it introduces a new unit of measure, which I never remember. It's some weird Q something.
Yeah, let me Google that.
And those and that like just like grid gives you your fractional unit that applies to the parent.
Yeah, it's this
new
thing,
unit,
CQH, this
QH and CQW, yeah.
And that just stands for container query.
Yeah. So what that is not doing is that it's when you use a value there, that is in relation to the parent. Yeah. So that's very, very nice. And it makes it a lot easier.
Yeah.
And I think something else to look.
Yeah.
So no, Scott, go ahead.
So I also wanted to say that, like, with most of the stuff, like, if you are hearing about a lot of the stuff for the first time, my go-to source is usually generally Miriam Suzanne has a lot of like really she has.
I'll get the links.
Okay, but then the other one that I think I usually reference as well, because I think she has more of an actual focus on these modern things, is Stephanie Eccles. So because she tends to actually focus on a lot of these modern things and how they work, whereas Miriam Suzanne tends to cover them here and there, but it's not her main focus.
I think, no, exactly.
So here's sorry, I just want to put the link in there.
Miriam Suzanne has also been instrumental in all these new CSS things we've got.
Yeah, 100%. And there's actually still a lot coming up.
So I'm just grabbing some links here. Modern CSS Solutions is Stephanie's site. By the way, we had Stephanie on our Q&A session a while back.
And Miriam Suzanne.
Check it out. And Miriam. So yeah, both of them. So check that out on our YouTube. Someone else who I also think is really good is I always forget the name. I'll find it. He writes really great, like really well thought out articles on modern CSS as well. I'll find that link as well. Just Alex. One thing I want to just add before we move on. Sorry?
It's not Alex.
No. I'll find it. Is that we also have a whole bunch of new properties that we should be looking into for sizing. Yeah. Min content, max content, fit content, and so on. Really well worth checking those out, because those are, instead of having to specify heights and widths, we say, okay, I want this to be as wide as my widest piece of content, or I want it to fit my content even though it's wrapping or whatever it might be. So have a look at those as well. And then something else that we spoke of earlier, which is logical properties, which there we go, Ishadi.
We should just dial his handle in.
Yeah, this guy his articles are incredibly well thought out and structured. Highly recommended. Yeah, cool. Okay. Yes, and he has that book as well. He has a book out as well. Can't remember what it's called.
CSS.
He's really, really great. Highly recommend checking him out. Okay. What's next?
Let's maybe. So we touched on Tailwind a little bit, but let's maybe just take a bit of a zoom outwards and maybe chat about some best practices for. So I think like the one we just covered, like also kind of touched on techniques and best practices for creating responsive and adaptive layouts that work seamlessly across screen sizes and so forth. Yeah, I think yeah, like the best advice I can give there is actually, um, there's no silver bullet, but um, there's a lot more tools now in your tool belt than there was 2-3 years ago. Things have changed dramatically, and maybe look at some of these resources that we shared and familiarize yourself with it. For example, just container queries. That just makes it so much. When you're talking about a dashboard, I
Yeah.
just gave an example where
Yeah.
if you have a sidebar, not a sidebar.
Yeah.
So yeah, that would be my
Yeah.
recommendation. Mm.
One of the things I don't particularly like about Tailwind is that it
Oh, sorry. Are
forces
we
you
going on? Are we
into.
going on Tailwind now?
Oh, sorry, I thought we were going on
Oh, that's a
Tailwind.
nice segue. Like, yeah. No. I wonder what are some practices
Yeah.
for using Tailwind.
Sorry, I thought
Uh,
we'd moved on to that one.
no. I just
Okay.
wanted. I was talking about the one for like what are best practices and techniques.
Sorry.
And
My
so
bad.
I'm just saying, like things have really changed the last year. And your
Yeah,
tool belt is much more extensive than it was literally a year ago. So
absolutely.
go
Yeah,
go check out Miriam, Suzanne. Go check out Stephanie, and yeah, the other links that were shared.
yeah. Right.
Mm.
Okay, Tailwind. So
Mm.
yeah, I think there are kind of two perspectives on Tailwind, and that's you either love it or you hate it, and there's no in between. I think I think there's a good in between. I I was originally very against it. I was like, wow, we're
I think
polluting our
I think
XML.
the I think
Um,
the web community at large was very much against. Like I can't help but feel that Atomic CSS got such a raw deal, um,
yeah,
because it effectively did exactly what Tailwind does now, and
yeah,
people just shat on it. Do you remember that?
yeah.
It was by the
Hmm.
Yahoo team.
I remember it.
Everyone made fun of it. Atomic CSS, is it still around?
Oh,
Uh,
look at the first article,
yeah,
Schalk.
exactly. And but yeah, see, it's not even around anymore. It was by the Yahoo team.
That's right.
And people just made so much Atomic Style, I think. The making of yeah. Oh, there's actually a documentary. Hmm. But anyway, so like Shem, I can't help but feel that like everyone loves whoops and breaking a lot of NDAs right now. I can't help but think that like feel that it got a bit of a raw deal, because like everyone just shat on it and now everyone loves Tailwind so much. But yeah, go ahead.
I just want to add something that Zandor just posted in the Discord that I think is really important. And it
Mm,
kind of leads into what I wanted to say about Tailwind as well.
mm,
And that's that, don't choose your breakpoints based on popular device sizes. You want to introduce breakpoints when you design breaks.
mm,
And that's the way it's future proof. This is a really great point from Zandor.
mm.
And I think container queries also gets us out of this a little bit, where we go,
Yes.
385 pixels is an iPhone and 720 is an iPad or whatever. That's not the way to approach it. We should be using a
Yeah.
component-based approach
But
to
this is also
responsive design.
but this is also
And
one of those things where back to the question around like should people just upskill their CSS, or because I've actually been in a situation where I did the classic thing. I think it was advocated by Dave Rupert back in the day, which is like don't decide your breakpoints ahead of time. Drag your
yeah,
screen until it starts looking gross, and then put a breakpoint there, and then drag until it. And like I did that, which ended up being that you have like all these custom breakpoints everywhere in your CSS, and like I actually got into a heated argument with one of the other team members. Like this was around like, was it 2016-ish, where they were like, this is just like insanity, like, you know, like we can't work this way, like we have to have predefined breakpoints and work against that. So it's also like, because that's just an easier mental
Yeah.
model, that it's the mobile, what's going to happen on mobile, what's going to happen on yeah. So it's also one of those things. But my general approach is drag it until it starts looking gross. And sometimes you drag it
Me
all the way
too.
down and it never starts looking gross, and you're like, hey, no breakpoints.
Yeah. Because you used grid.
Or you just designed it
Yeah.
in a clever way back in Figma.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's where it starts, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So related to this breakpoint thing in Tailwind, like Tailwind configs breakpoints. Yeah. So in Tailwind, if you're using an MD class or MD prefix class or something like that, you're getting a predefined breakpoint that Tailwind is setting up for you, and it's a media query. It's not a container query.
Yeah. But by necessity, like it can't work any
no,
other
of course,
way.
it cannot work any other way, and that's something that you kind of buy into whenever you use any kind of framework. I mean, Bootstrap, going all the way back to Bootstrap, that's how Bootstrap originally became the go-to kind of thing for people who didn't want to write a grid that was responsive. Yeah.
I'm old enough to
and it was
remember when Bootstrap wasn't responsive, and like then what release? I think it was like Bootstrap 3 or something, and like that was the big sell. Like Bootstrap 3 is going to be responsive now. I can't remember which one it was, but yeah.
Yeah, and
Twitter
then there were all
Bootstrap, I
these
might add.
Twitter Bootstrap, yes, developed at Twitter. Yeah, gosh.
Yeah, X Bootstrap.
Sorry,
Yeah,
X, formerly known as Twitter.
Twitter
Yeah,
Bootstrap.
let's not get
Yeah.
into that. So yeah, Tailwind. I was initially like a big skeptic of Tailwind because it was like it went against a lot of my like old man purity, separation of concerns stuff. But I've changed my mind on a lot of that, as I think you should, as the landscape within which we work changes. But there are some things that that I think we should be paying a lot of attention to with Tailwind, and that is not overusing the classes because we can. I mean, I already mentioned this, but like, horrendous markup soup just to create a hover and a focus state. You can easily do that in standard-based CSS. One thing I do like about Tailwind is it uses a layers approach out of the box. So you're getting your reset, your base, your utilities, etc., using that. And there's no reason why you can't just create your own layers as well. I think a lot of people go all in on Tailwind, and then they're like, oh, I can't do this because it's not in Tailwind or whatever. That's not the case.
Yes.
The same way that you would, I mean, look at that, Schalk. That's awful, right?
Yeah. But
Just
like also
that
it's
example right there. That's disgusting.
but it's like also like it's because like I think we grew up with a different sensibility.
No,
And like
I
I think the
agree.
thing I think the thing that made me really I think like, and I think for a lot of us, so you're talking about like you were very skeptical or whatever. I think like JSX for me was really like the thing that really was like, hey, maybe I don't actually, maybe best practices like aren't inherently better just because they're best practices. And I think like, because I, much like everyone else, when JSX became a thing, like was like, what is this absolute nonsense? And now I'm so convinced by JSX. I'm not even talking about React. I'm talking about like just JSX as writing functions as XML. And in React, it just binds to create React element, but you can do anything with JSX. You can compose music with it. You can do anything. It's a way to compose functions just in an XML syntax. Now, like, and interestingly enough, like, like I'm very much in favor of it being natively added to browsers now. It almost feels like something that's really missing from browsers. But yeah, so I think,
I mean, I
like, to me,
agree with
that's
that.
like, I think the community at large, kind of, everyone's asses was a bit handed to them by means of like how much everyone hated JSX and how everyone's now like, oh, it's actually a really good idea. And that's also what, I'm pretty skeptical of server components as well, but it's the exact same thing. I'm like, yeah, remember like how much I didn't think JSX was a good idea? Because I started React back when you had to do .create class. Like,
Oh gosh, yes, me
yeah,
too.
I started React way back, like even back when it was not even where it was considered to not even like you have to use Rescript to even use it and stuff. So, or not Rescript, it was called ReasonML then back in the day. But anyway, sorry, I digress. But yes, I have the same thing with Tailwind as well that you had.
Yeah.
Mm.
So I think, yeah. So my perspective has changed a bit. And we use it, on my everyday work. We use Tailwind, but with caveats. Yeah.
Mm.
I think if you've got a design system and you're working in a very component-based way, Tailwind is very useful for certain things, but you don't need to go all in on, throwing every single class under that it contains at things. You can use fewer utility classes if you have a component-based approach, basically, I think. I really like working in a JavaScript framework and having a Tailwind config file. It's very, very useful. Particularly, I mean, at the moment, we're working on a project that has 70 white labeled instances.
Yes.
That's a lot. And they all need to have different branding, different colors. And I'm not just talking about, we're changing the text color in the sidebar. It's all the way down to data visualization, graphs that have different styles, etc., etc., etc. Tailwind's extremely, extremely useful for that. Of course, with our good friend HSLA, which we'd really need to do a talk about colors sometimes.
Yeah, I would. We need to talk about colors and units. I think like units deserve its own talk.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so sorry, I just want to like also interject there. I would much rather have someone use Tailwind than Bootstrap. So if the reason for wanting to use Tailwind is because you're not confident in your own abilities of CSS, and I also think that's fine. Like I think like people tend to shit on that a bit, but I don't think you need to be good with CSS. I think you can, like, people tend to shit on people who are just like, I just want to do JavaScript. And I think that's fine. I think
That's
like
fine.
in the same way that you can just be Hayden Pickering and just like do a little bit of JavaScript, but mostly focus on HTML and CSS. And I think like in those cases, if you're just like, I don't really want to dive into CSS and all that stuff, then use Tailwind. I'd much rather you use that than try and mangle some copy pasted stuff from Stack Overflow or whatever.
Yeah. I think just one other thing that you need to be aware of when you're using something like Tailwind is, of course, you're in a vendor lock-in, right?
Yes.
And we should always just be a little bit wary about what that could mean in the future.
And another thing also worth mentioning is that similar to Bootstrap, like maybe there's just one part of Tailwind that you want, and you don't have to bring in. So a good one is, so if you just want like a sane set of like constraint properties, a good one is open props. I don't know if you've checked this out
I've
before.
looked at but never used. Yeah.
So if you just want,
is this Adam Motham? Is this Adam Motham from Google? It doesn't really matter. Yes, there he is. Adam Argyle, I mean. Sorry, Adam Argyle. Adam Motham. Too many Adams.
Too many damn Adams. It's AA. It's AA dog. But yeah, so this is a good approach. Yeah. If you just want, like, I don't know what the best borders are, I don't know what the best like hovers are and shadows and whatever, just use open props. And say, hey, I want the I want the button stuff or the whatever. So that might be. And if you're talking once again like vendor lock-in, you're not locking them into like the whole Tailwind like kind of approach. You're just like, this is just values. So that's
Yes,
something worth
exactly.
considering. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me share that as well.
Just something related to this. I mean, I'm getting away from Tailwind now, but one of the reasons why I like Shad CN is that you also just install what you want. Yeah. So you're like, oh well, I can write a button component in like a minute. What I actually, but I don't have a data table. Yeah. You can just install that. And because they're just components that live in your UI, you can edit and change them as much as you like, and you're not locked into something that has to work in a certain way. In fact, if you go to any component here on Shad CN, like just anyone,
Avatar,
you'll see their manual, CLI or manual on the installation there. You can just copy and paste that into.
Nice.
So you don't even need to be dependent on
you can create it yourself.
Management. Yeah. Exactly. You can edit it exactly how you want.
Oh, this is cool. I didn't even know about this. But I think also another thing to be cognizant of, whether it's Shad CN or Tailwind, like most companies don't do like this out of the goodness of their hearts. At some point, they're going to try and sell you something. At some point, they're going to try and upsell you something. Or the same with Material UI or whatever, so like some of them are a bit more aggressive. Some of them are just like, hey, we have some extra stuff that you can buy. But there's probably some monetization at the end of this road somewhere. So that's something
it's
to be
right there
cognizant
in
of.
the sidebar on the right.
Yeah. There you go. And Tailwind, like they're trying to get you to like buy the
components.
Yeah. So just be cognizant of that. So they might. So their approach might actually not even be informed by what is best practice, but just what is easiest to monetize. And I spoke about Vercel as well, and the whole thing about why Vercel is kind of defaulting to the server components. And I think that's because obviously that's how they make money. So I don't actually think that's a sane default. I think it's better to default to client and then say what needs to be server. But anyway, let's maybe tackle two quick more.
There's another link from Zandor on Tailwind and what might be not great about it.
That's great. I didn't even know about that. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Cool.
All right. So
we've got
maybe
another one in the chat, Scott.
Yeah, maybe let's grab two from the chat. Ooh, that's great.
Oh, yeah, this is a great question. Yeah, so
feature detection.
So, feature detection, yeah. So you can use in CSS, you can use @supports.
Yeah. So like
detection.
that example. So that example that he just said, like when he says animation, I assume it's like the actual keyframe animations. So you can say, so let's say you do your regular. Let's just do example, and then you have like animation name. I can never remember this from the top of my head. I always have to look up like all the stuff you need to define. But let's say spinning, and I think
duration.
You need duration. Those are the two that you need.
Those are the two you need, yeah.
Yes. Then what you can also do, if you want to, so let's say you're going to have this thing that's not going to like animate or whatever when, I don't know, like, but let's say you want to have a fallback. Then you can do @supports. I need to get the syntax right now. I think it's not, or is it
not colon?
Yeah, not colon. And then you can just say animation name spinning or whatever. You can type anything here. Effectively, what's going to happen, it's going to try and run it in CSS and actually see if like CSS is able to understand what that does. Is the syntax right here? That doesn't seem right.
No, it's not. There's no colon. It's at support, not. At support
yeah, it's
space,
outside.
not. And then
it's in
brackets
okay. So then you can say, okay, like let's say if there's no animation, let's do something clever. Like let's say, let's just do something like this and go like, content loading or whatever. I'm impressed with how clever this is. But yeah, like you can define your fallbacks or generally
you could say animation not supported on this device
or whatever. Yeah. But the main thing is that like if you maybe want like like progressive enhancement would say that you should actually do it the other way around, but I don't know, like sometimes I make an exception, like in this case where you can just assume that 99% of people are going to get the better experience, and you actually do a fallback instead of assuming they don't have it. But yeah.
While we're on this, what we should actually also be doing is wrapping our animation in a prefers in a reduced motion as well, media query.
So you want to tell me tell people what that is, Justin? So is it, I'm gonna try it now from memory. Prefers is it animation reduced?
No.
Okay. Copilot, like
prefers
usually when I start,
dash
reduced
reduce,
motion
dash motion. That's it.
Yes.
Nothing else.
And
then you would put your at support.
Yeah.
You would put your animation.
Yeah. Yeah. Like that or whatever. But I usually just start typing prefers and then
no. You don't want to do it this way, Schalk. You're saying if the person doesn't want animation, show them the animation. You don't want to do that.
So we're giving no one animations except for the people that don't explicitly want it. Can you do none? I actually don't know.
Yes.
Or would you have
you
do
can
initial?
Do the shorthand animation none.
Yeah. It's like background. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
There you go. Okay. Do you want to explain what prefers reduced motion is?
Yeah. So it's reduced. So this is on your operating system, you can go and set animations in your accessibility selections to none. Yeah. So it's an accessibility setting. It also like speeds things up as well. I mean, I switch it off even though I've got a like M3 Mac, so that would so that works at an operating system level, not a browser level. Yeah. So you switch it off in your operating system settings, and then it's non-essential motion. Yeah. Non-essential motion.
Yeah. Or really like
a lot of people
jarring emotion.
A lot of people, So a lot of people who have vestibular disorders or things like that experience like a jarring experiences with.
So like this. What happens when you go? This is probably like GIFs, so like it's probably not going to do anything. So like
that's definitely all GIFs. Yeah.
So but as Justin mentioned, there are people with certain like like I think it's with your ear where like excessive motion kind of is nauseating to them and so forth, so they switch it off.
It's your inner ear that detects motion, and vestibular motion. Yeah.
Yeah. So another one that people don't even know about is you can do the same for like dark or light mode. So you can actually, it breaks my heart when I see people build dark mode and light mode with JavaScript.
Oh,
And it's the worst. That's always the example that gets used for the context API. But the problem with that is that then the JavaScript needs to load. So for a couple of seconds, someone gets a nuclear explosion in their face of white, especially when I'm lying in bed at night and just scrolling in dark mode or whatever, and I go somewhere, it's like poof, white, and then my
yeah.
eyes. But yeah, okay. Cool. Okay, that's a great question. I've never really thought about the idea that like smart TVs and stuff have really minimal like CSS
They
that they
do. Yeah.
support. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's hit us with the last one, a closing one. Let's see. There's a good one that's about, I think above that, about, oh, someone's asking about the Discord server. But let me
I'll
also,
post the link.
let me put a link in there. Yes, sorry. Like, this is higher up.
Which one?
Like about the 3D, both are from Andre.
This one.
Uh,
Or above that one.
Oh no, yeah. Well, no, that wasn't. But okay, so I think like to quickly answer that one, yes, it's possible. And with view transitions, actually now it's not only possible; it's probably the preferred way to do it. Yeah, because when you're doing it with JavaScript, you're actually modifying the DOM. So you're actually making changes to things that are shown. You're swapping things around. When you do it with view transitions, the way view transitions work is that you don't have things in an in-between state.
Correct.
So I would actually say semantically, it makes more sense to do this just with CSS nowadays. Okay. Then okay. Let's do the one about my boss's biggest concern every day.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry, no, actually, no, I think Andre had his turn. Like, let's do the one that's like the feasibility roadmap. Because I think that's maybe more applicable. Sorry, Andre. Yeah. So, okay. How do you want to tackle this one? So there's that front end roadmap thing that people always. I have some suspicion. I have some skepticism of this. I think people don't realize that. Wait, I think people don't realize. Have you seen this before, Justin?
Yep.
Yeah. So people like it's very popular. People share it around. My students love it. I think I have some reservations with it, about it. Like, I think the first being that it's a very specific view on like how you should do front end development. There's lots of like competing opinions in terms of even stuff like should you use Tailwind, should you not use Tailwind. So yeah, like it's like just don't be too dogmatic. But I think it's also
Yeah.
like I'm also not convinced that it's feasible.
I
Because
completely agree. Yeah.
yeah,
This is a
it's like
lifelong
literally,
project. Yeah.
yeah, it's like okay, before you learn BEM, pick a framework.
Yeah. It's crazy.
That
Yeah.
seems
It makes no
weird,
sense.
man. It's like
Yeah.
you have to decide you before you even learn SAS.
Yeah.
Or
It's all wrong. That's
and
all
I think
wrong to
it's
me. Yeah.
yeah, and like these things aren't I would say these things aren't like even, yeah, I don't know. Like, it's just like there's a lot of assumptions here. There's a lot of, I think, a bit of a like hand waviness, like in terms of maybe like making it like picking a framework as if it's just like a random thing you do. Um, okay, yeah. And also, like, when do you know you've picked a framework? When are you done picking a framework? Like, is
Yeah.
it when you can use state in React? Can you then move on?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Or
So I
yeah.
have some reservations about this, but uh, anyway, and I think it also like the other thing is as well. Some of the other reservations I have about this is it overly emphasizes the technologies, um, and underemphasizes the stuff that I think that's really important about like becoming more experienced, which is about ways of thinking,
Mm.
um, and you don't become more senior by just learning more and more and more and more and more. Learning one more framework, learning one more thing. You know, jest,
Learning,
test. Like
learning,
it's
learning
not a
nine
shopping.
build tools.
Yes, like that's not how. And I actually think at some point that's a danger because you're not
Yeah.
engaging with things sufficiently enough to
Yeah.
really get to
Yes.
the underlying things, to get to the
Yeah.
underlying patterns and approaches and so forth. Yeah,
It's like learning how to use every single tool in Figma. It doesn't mean you're going to be a good
yeah.
designer.
I often tell my students the thing is like it's like saying what does a carpenter do? Okay, a carpenter he hammers nails in, he saws stuff, and um he sands stuff. Okay, so if you think about what a carpenter does by means of that, then what? Sorry, I shouldn't use the F word, but like I'm a carpenter. You know, anyone's a carpenter. Like so, but it's not that. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of refining your thought processes, your process, your you know, like the way I write React now than compared to how I wrote React 5 years ago is very different. And I think this kind of is a bit misleading in terms of, that React is something like picking a framework, something that you finish and then you're done and you move on to the next thing. So I think like went on a bit of a personal like rant there, but I think the point being is like even when it's like when you're talking about like bring that question up again when you're thinking about like okay cool what is like a nice roadmap or whatever, be careful to not get too hung up on the technologies. I think like specifically through the lens of CSS, the most important thing that I think distinguishes a junior the way a junior does CSS compared to an intermediate and upwards is scalability. Like setting something to blue, setting something to red, that's easy. Thinking about your CSS at scale, like that is what the difference is. So methodologies, like BEM and those things, and what do they do, and yeah, it's like I think there's such a wide chasm between using CSS and architecting CSS.
Massive,
So
massive difference. Yeah.
yeah, so be just skeptical of overly thinking about it. Like, okay, I need to learn media queries. I need to learn. It's actually how you use those things as part of a bigger personal architectural approach, because the way I
Mm.
architect CSS is maybe different from the way Justin does it.
Yeah.
I think actually that's a given. I can say that. So,
Yeah.
but the thing is, I understand it enough to be able to reason about it, and he understands it enough to reason about the way he does it, and we can talk about it, and we can say like, okay, cool, but okay, this makes sense, that doesn't make sense, and like I think that's the key thing. Develop the language. This would be my
Yes.
advice: is develop the language to talk about CSS. and more broadly, like front end, like things like even basic stuff like semantic HTML, even things like selectors, pseudo elements, classes, pseudo classes, things like BEM, suit CSS, and like get a sense for what problems things solve. Even Tailwind, look at Tailwind and try and figure out what problem does Tailwind solve. I think a lot of people use Tailwind without really knowing why Tailwind even exists.
Yeah.
Like if you ask a lot of people like why does Tailwind exist? And why does Tailwind exist and styled components exist? And SAS exist? And like why are these different things, and why aren't they just like a one tool to rule them all? And I think those understanding that is much more important than actually a checkbox of cool meta queries, container queries, gradients,
Completely agree
or
with
whatever.
that. Yeah.
But that sucks, and like it sucks to learn those type of things because they're much more fuzzy and they're not that fun. You can't apply them because it's in your mind. You can't go and put something in code and whoa, look at that, awesome hover effect. But yeah.
I mean, you can do that as well.
Yeah, sure. And like honestly, I think like I'm increasingly coming to the view that like the only way you learn to work at scale is by messing up when working at scale.
And you will.
Like, yes, there's no way to emulate scale. There's no way to learn to get better at scale without working at scale. So my advice would be try and work at scale, but try and do risk management. Don't be like, I'm gonna build the next Netflix and like promise a client and set contracts in place, and then halfway you realize, oh shit, like everything's just a mess and whatever, because that's how you learn. But you also don't want to do it on someone else's money and also on promises and deadlines and things. So like there's this really great book called I don't know if you know about it, Justin, called Apprenticeship Patterns. Yeah, it's a great book. It's like and one of the things is like ways of learning and like teaching and so forth, but specifically of software. And yeah, you can maybe share a link to it. It's an O'Reilly book, I think. And like there's a really cool thing there, which is like a breakable toy. And that has been my approach, is like trying to find breakable toys. So things that you can play around with, you can break and whatever. And by breaking it and messing up, you learn. But it's a toy. You're not gonna like at any point you can step away from it and say like, yeah, this is just getting too crazy. I think I've learned what I had to learn. I don't have to see this through, because the problem is if you learn in production, by the time you learn that lesson, you have to see it through now. And now, yeah. So yeah, cool. Okay, Liesel. I think that's maybe
good
that's maybe a good place to end off. But yeah, I don't know if you quickly. I spoke a lot about kind of this one now, and I think I gave some very unsatisfactory answers.
I think yeah. I mean, Schalk, you and I both worked in like education a lot, and we know how hard this kind of question is to answer. Yeah, in terms of.
I think the one thing I can say is Chris Coyer's advice, which is, I don't know if you know what it is, Justin.
Not offhand, no.
Just build websites.
Yes, of course.
There
we go.
But yeah. So the most common question is this is from 2012. Like this has been kind of my North Star in terms of my career for me, because 2012 I barely knew anything. What should I learn next? Just build websites.
Is that link still there, Schalk? Frontend design.
CSS tricks. Probably
no,
not.
That one. Yeah. Damn it.
Yeah.
justbuildwebsites.com, no longer up.
There used to be one. There used to be one. I would
Yeah,
send
there
my
used to be
students
one.
to it. But yeah, like, that's just build stuff. Build stuff, build stuff, build stuff, build stuff. Um,
Yeah,
like like don't spend too much time on Udemy. Don't spend too much time on Pluralsight, YouTube, whatever. Build stuff, and when you need to learn something to build the next part of this thing, then learn it. There's also this concept of
yeah,
tutorial hell. I think maybe, yeah, I should have maybe touched on this in the beginning. We're getting there now, kind of in a roundabout way, but there's this concept of tutorial hell, which is like at some point you're getting diminishing returns by just learning. Like at some point you have to gain practical experience before you can continue learning again.
yeah,
And I often find, like, with people starting out, that it's a bit lopsided. They like, spend too much time watching tutorials and stuff and following paint by numbers stuff, and too little time just hacking away and building their own things, using their own intuition and so forth. And you need both of those. um,
yeah,
because you don't even know, once again, the thing with Tailwind, you're going to understand what problem Tailwind solves when you run into that problem. It's the same
exactly.
with
Yes,
me back in the
and
day
how it's
when,
doing it as well. Yeah,
yeah, and it was the same for me back in the day when everyone and their grandma used Redux. Is like I was very fortunate enough that because I was using React for so long, that I eventually created my own, what Redux became, just to manage like kind of global state and whatever. Um, and so you like, if you need to encounter that problem first before you understand, oh, this is why people use Redux, and not just pull it in because everyone's, well, that's not the case anymore. It used to be the case. um, so I would maybe even just go and write plain CSS until you kind of realize what problem Tailwind is solving.
yeah.
um, yeah.
Yes, I think that's a fundamental thing you need to do. Yeah,
Mm.
you look at if you can't, yeah, Tailwind becomes a hindrance if you don't know what it's doing, why it's doing it, and how it's doing
Yeah,
it. It
because
actually
then
is terrible. Yeah,
yeah,
because you don't
because
know
then you
what you
lean
don't know.
into lean into the parts that it's the, so obviously it gives you stuff, but it requires certain, it has drawbacks in order to give you that. In order to capitalize
Exactly.
on that, you need to understand what it gives you and what the costs are of that. Yeah,
Quite right. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Cool.
Okay, cool.
One last thing that just build stuff, build
Mm,
things or whatever it was, reminded me of this, which I put the link into.
mm.
It's Melanie Richards, who used to work at who I think she works at Webflow now. She
Oh
used to
yeah.
work at Microsoft. Yeah, but
Mm,
this is, yeah, Scott, maybe just share. This is just a list of ideas of stuff you can do to just
yeah.
build stuff. Yeah.
I think this is actually inspired by Chris's thing, because I do see here
No, it
there's like,
is. It is. Yeah. It's
share
exactly.
your banjo covers, and like,
Yeah.
yeah, Chris is a big like banjo fan.
Yeah,
Oh,
no,
this is
this is
great.
exactly
Yeah.
inspired by that. She was very clear.
Mm,
This is inspired by that talk
yeah.
that he did.
So
And
pick
she
one of
made this an
these.
open
Yeah.
repo that anyone could
Yeah.
contribute
Yeah.
to. And there's some
Oh,
great
cool. There's
ideas there.
actually a list of. Oh.
Well, not, no.
Well, yours could be the first.
You can be the first. Yeah.
Yeah, but there's a ton of, like, my, you know what my recommendation always is the best thing, like, to start, I think, is a podcast app, because like, because of RSS, and like, so there's so much complicated stuff in a
That's,
podcast app.
yeah, yeah.
Is like, so, like, so you can even do like offline, like, PWAs and stuff, and
PWAs and
there's like playing and resuming,
audio
and
players. Yeah.
yeah,
Great.
exactly. And like filtering and whatever. But you don't even need a
Transcripts and
database.
yeah.
You don't need a database.
No,
Like,
no.
you just have RSS. So you
Yeah.
point your website app, you just have a user in, like, copy and paste the RSS, and there you go.
Done. Yeah.
Whereas if you want to build any
Great.
type of other app, you probably need to spin up a database or whatever. Yeah. So I often find that, like, building a podcast app is like when I say app, I mean like it can be a website or whatever,
Yeah.
is the best bang for your buck in terms of actually not requiring too many other things beyond the HTML and the JavaScript and the whatever, and like being able to wrestle with some really like interesting problems. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Great.
Cool. All right. I think we can end it off there. Thanks everyone, and let's do a quick pick of like who we think deserves that voucher. Okay. Oh, yo, Zandor, thanks for these links, buddy. Oh, what do
I
you
like
think?
Sean's question,
I wanted to say Sean's one. Yeah.
but I
Okay.
think, is
Sean
he
isn't
in
in South
Cape Town?
Africa. He's not even in South
Yeah.
Africa, so he can't use Takealot. Sorry, buddy. I think Sean, you're in New Zealand now, are you not? But yeah,
I don't know if he's still here. Yeah.
I think we can maybe go with Andre because he contributed a lot. He asked more than one question.
Sure.
Yeah. Andre, if you are on the Discord, just DM us your email and stuff. And if you're not, then join the Discord. There is a link here that Justin posted. All right. Cool. And enjoy your Takealot voucher.
Thanks,
Cool.
everyone. Join
Yeah.
us on Monday if you're interested in learning a bit about forms and Framer. Should be a good one. Otherwise, we'll be back. Keep an eye on the meetup group and and join the Discord, and please share the link around if you can. We're trying to get as many people to join on the Discord. Thanks.
And one thing, sorry, just one thing also that I want to get going there is like also the jobs channel.
Yes.
So like if your employer or whatever is like looking for people, post it on the jobs channel. Yeah. All right. Okay, guys. Have a great one.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.